Claire Bennett was known across the country for her sharp wit, fearless reporting, and ability to uncover the truth. As a national TV anchor, she had interviewed politicians, celebrities, and everyday heroes, earning both respect and admiration. But behind the polished exterior of her high-profile career was a deeply personal side: her love for family. Claire's younger brother, Ethan, meant everything to her. Ethan had been through more than most people could imagine. 5 years earlier, a devastating car accident left him paralyzed from the waist down. While the crash changed his life forever, it didn't break his spirit. With sheer determination, he adapted to his new reality, learning how to navigate life in a wheelchair. His home became his sanctuary, a place where every detail was carefully designed to give him independence. Ramps replaced steps, widened doorways allowed easy movement, and grab bars ensured safety. To Ethan, these modifications weren't just conveniences, they were lifelines. The house sat in a quiet suburban neighborhood governed by a homeowners association, HOA, an organization notorious for its strict rules about appearances. At first glance, the community seemed perfect: tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, and charming houses painted in neutral tones. It was exactly the kind of environment Ethan wanted: peaceful and close-knit. But beneath the surface, trouble brewed. The HOA had a reputation for being rigid, enforcing guidelines that prioritized aesthetics over practicality. For someone like Ethan, whose needs clashed with their vision of uniform beauty, living there came with challenges. Claire visited Ethan often, always struck by his resilience. On one such visit, she noticed something different. Ethan looked frustrated as he handed her a letter from the HOA. "Another warning," he said with a sigh. The note complained about the metal ramp leading up to his front door, calling it an eyesore that violated community standards. Claire frowned, flipping through pages of similar letters stacked on the kitchen counter. Each one demanded changes, insisting that Ethan remove features essential to his daily life. "They don't understand," Ethan muttered, wheeling himself toward the window. Outside, kids played on the sidewalk while neighbors chatted over fences. It all seemed so normal, so idyllic. Yet Ethan felt increasingly alienated. He explained how he tried reasoning with the HOA, submitting formal requests for exceptions based on his disability. But each plea fell on deaf ears. Instead of compassion, he faced cold bureaucracy. Claire listened intently, anger simmering beneath her calm demeanor. She couldn't believe anyone would treat her brother this way. Still, she reassured him, saying, "Don't worry, Ethan. We'll figure this out together." Deep down, though, she wondered if reasoning with the HOA was even possible. They operated like gatekeepers, guarding their precious image at any cost. Little did Claire know, this issue would soon spiral into something far beyond a simple dispute over property modifications. As she hugged Ethan goodbye that day, Claire made a silent promise to herself. No matter what happened, she wouldn't let anyone take away her brother's dignity or his freedom. What neither of them realized was that the HOA's actions would push Claire into uncharted territory, forcing her to confront not only their cruelty, but also the limits of her own influence. It was a typical evening for Claire, who was in the middle of preparing for a live broadcast at the studio. The newsroom buzzed with activity as producers rushed around, organizing scripts and coordinating with camera crews. Claire's phone vibrated on the desk beside her notes. Seeing Ethan's name flash across the screen, she immediately answered, expecting their usual casual chat about his day or maybe a funny story from the neighborhood. But this time, his voice was frantic. "Claire, they've done it this time," Ethan said, his tone laced with panic. "They locked me in." "What do you mean, locked you in?" Claire asked, her stomach sinking. "The HOA. They installed a gate across my driveway. A locked gate. I can't get out unless someone opens it for me." His words tumbled out quickly, each sentence more alarming than the last. "I tried calling them, but no one's answering. I'm stuck here, Claire, completely trapped." Claire froze, gripping the phone tightly. She could hear the frustration and fear in her brother's voice. For someone like Ethan, being confined to his home wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. What if there was an emergency? How would paramedics reach him? Even routine errands, like picking up medication or groceries, were now impossible without help. "Stay calm, Ethan," she said firmly, though her mind raced. "I'll handle this." Hanging up, Claire felt a mix of emotions: anger, disbelief, and guilt. How had things escalated so quickly? Just days ago, she'd reassured Ethan that the HOA wouldn't dare go too far. Now she realized how wrong she'd been. This wasn't just about enforcing rules anymore. It was personal. By locking Ethan inside his own home, the HOA had crossed a line they couldn't come back from. The next morning, Claire drove straight to Ethan's house after finishing her early show. When she arrived, her heart sank. A tall metal gate blocked the driveway, secured with a heavy padlock. It looked out of place against the tidy suburban backdrop, almost mocking in its presence. Ethan greeted her from the doorway, his expression a mix of embarrassment and defiance. "I can't believe they actually did this," Claire muttered, shaking her head as she examined the gate. She snapped a few photos with her phone, already planning her next move. "This isn't just unfair, it's cruel." Ethan sighed, wheeling himself back inside. "I begged them not to do it. Told them I needed access for medical reasons, but they didn't care. They said I should have thought about that before moving here." Claire clenched her fists, trying to keep her temper in check. Her brother wasn't some inconvenience to be brushed aside. He was a human being with rights, and yet the HOA treated him like a problem to solve, ignoring the fact that their actions directly impacted his quality of life. As they sat together in the living room, Ethan pleaded with Claire not to make the situation public. "If you bring your job into this, they'll hate me even more," he warned. "And what if it backfires? What if they find another way to punish me?" Claire understood his concerns, but she also knew silence wasn't an option. This wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about standing up to bullies who hid behind rules and regulations. Still, she promised him she'd proceed carefully, at least for now. That night, as Claire lay in bed replaying the day's events in her mind, she realized something important. The HOA had underestimated her. They saw her as nothing more than Ethan's sister, unaware of the power she wielded as a national TV anchor. Their mistake would cost them dearly. Claire smiled faintly in the dark, already plotting her next steps. If the HOA wanted a fight, they were about to get one, and they wouldn't know what hit them. Determined to resolve the issue quietly, Claire decided to attend an HOA meeting. She wanted to face the board members directly and appeal to their sense of reason, or at least try. Before heading to the meeting, she spent hours preparing her arguments. She gathered documents showing how the HOA's actions violated federal disability laws, printed photos of Ethan's home modifications, and even wrote down talking points to stay focused. Despite her frustration, she planned to approach the situation calmly, hoping to find common ground. When Claire arrived at the community center where the meeting was held, she felt a mix of nerves and determination. The room was filled with neighbors she recognized but rarely spoke to, some curious, others indifferent. At the front sat the HOA board members, including Richard Caldwell, the president, who had become infamous after his disastrous TV interview. As Claire took a seat near the back, she reminded herself that this wasn't about revenge. It was about justice for Ethan and others like him. The meeting began with routine updates about landscaping schedules and holiday decorations, topics that felt trivial given the stakes. Finally, it was time for public comments. Claire stood up, drawing every eye in the room. Her heart pounded as she walked to the podium, clutching her folder of evidence. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "My name is Claire Bennett, and I'm here today to speak on behalf of my brother, Ethan, and other residents who have been unfairly targeted by HOA policies." She launched into her presentation, starting with Ethan's story. Using clear, simple language, she explained how the locked gate had trapped him in his own home, and why features like ramps and widened doorways were essential for his independence. Then, she broadened her focus, sharing examples from other residents who had faced similar discrimination. One slide showed a photo of a disabled veteran fined repeatedly for parking his van too far from the curb. Another highlighted outdated bylaws that blatantly ignored accessibility needs. Claire paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. These aren't just inconveniences, they're barriers that prevent people from living full, dignified lives, she continued. Federal laws exist to protect individuals with disabilities, yet your policies consistently disregard them. Why? Her question hung in the air, met with awkward silence. Richard cleared his throat and leaned forward. Ms. Bennett, we understand your concerns, but exceptions create chaos. If we allow one person to break the rules, everyone will want special treatment. Claire raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. So you're saying accommodating someone with a disability is breaking the rules? Do you truly believe that maintaining aesthetic uniformity is more important than ensuring basic human rights? Richard shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his fellow board members for support. None of them spoke up. Sensing weakness, Claire pressed on. Let me ask you something else. Would any of you willingly trade places with my brother for a single day? Would you be okay with being locked inside your home because a ramp doesn't match your idea of beauty? The room fell silent. Board members exchanged uneasy looks, avoiding eye contact with Claire and each other. One woman muttered under her breath, "This isn't what we signed up for." It was clear they hadn't anticipated such a direct confrontation, and certainly not from someone with Claire's poise and authority. As the meeting drew to a close, Claire left the podium, knowing she hadn't changed their minds overnight. But she had planted seeds of doubt, exposing the flaws in their logic and forcing them to confront the consequences of their actions. Outside the community center, several neighbors approached her, thanking her for speaking out. Some admitted they'd been too afraid to challenge the HOA before, but now felt emboldened. Driving home, Claire replayed the meeting in her mind. While the board remained stubborn, she sensed cracks forming beneath their polished facade. They might not admit it yet, but they were beginning to realize they had underestimated her. And Ethan. Little did they know, this was only the beginning. The fight was far from over, but Claire felt more determined than ever to see it through. Back at the studio, Claire wrestled with a decision that weighed heavily on her mind. Should she use her platform to expose what the HOA had done to Ethan? On one hand, she knew it could bring much-needed attention to their unfair treatment of disabled residents. On the other hand, she worried about putting Ethan in the spotlight and making him a target for further retaliation. After hours of tossing and turning, she finally decided. Enough was enough. The HOA's actions weren't just an attack on her brother. They were emblematic of a larger problem that needed to be addressed. The next day, Claire called an emergency meeting with her producer, Sarah. She explained everything: the locked gate, the warning letters, the dismissive attitude of the HOA, and shared her idea for a special segment on the show. Sarah listened intently, nodding as Claire spoke. "This isn't just your brother's story," Sarah said firmly. "It's a story about discrimination, power abuse, and systemic neglect. People need to hear it." With Sarah's support, Claire began gathering evidence. She reached out to other residents in Ethan's neighborhood who might have faced similar issues. At first, many were hesitant to speak up, fearing backlash from the HOA. But when Claire assured them their identities would remain anonymous, they opened up. One woman recounted how her request to install a wheelchair ramp was denied because it didn't match the aesthetic. Another man shared how he was fined repeatedly for parking his handicap-accessible van too close to the curb, even though it was the only spot wide enough for him to exit safely. Armed with these testimonies, Claire also dug into the HOA's bylaws and past decisions. What she found shocked her. Over the years, the organization had consistently prioritized appearance over accessibility, often ignoring federal laws designed to protect people with disabilities. They claimed their rules applied equally to everyone, but in practice, they disproportionately affected those who needed accommodations the most. Finally, the day of the broadcast arrived. Claire stood behind the anchor desk, her usual calm demeanor masking the fire burning inside her. As the cameras rolled, she introduced the segment with a simple yet powerful statement. Tonight, we're shining a light on a quiet epidemic affecting communities across America, discrimination disguised as policy. She began by sharing Ethan's story, showing footage of the locked gate and the modifications he'd made to live independently. Viewers watched as Claire described how the HOA had turned a deaf ear to his repeated pleas for understanding. Then, she transitioned to the stories of other residents, highlighting the emotional toll of being treated as second-class citizens in their own homes. To drive her point home, Claire played clips of interviews with disability rights advocates who explained how cases like Ethan's were all too common. These aren't isolated incidents, one expert said. They're symptoms of a system that values property values over human dignity. As the segment aired, social media exploded. Thousands of viewers took to Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, expressing outrage over the HOA's actions. Hashtags like #JusticeForEthan and #AccessibilityForAll began trending nationwide. Messages poured in from people sharing their own experiences with discriminatory housing policies, creating a groundswell of support for change. Meanwhile, the HOA scrambled to respond. Board members held an impromptu press conference where they awkwardly defended their decisions, claiming they were simply following established guidelines. Their attempts to justify locking Ethan in his home only fueled more criticism. Clips of their bumbling responses went viral, further damaging their reputation. By the end of the broadcast, Claire felt a mix of emotions: relief, pride, and a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time since this ordeal began, she felt hopeful. The HOA may have underestimated her, but now the entire country was watching. And if there was one thing Claire knew how to do, it was hold people accountable under the bright glare of public scrutiny. The backlash from Claire's explosive TV segment hit the HOA like a tidal wave. Within hours, their phones were ringing nonstop. Angry calls from viewers, emails flooding their inbox, and even local news crews camped outside the president's house. The once powerful board members, who had operated in relative obscurity, found themselves thrust into the national spotlight. And they didn't like it one bit. Claire wasted no time capitalizing on the momentum. She hired a top disability rights attorney, someone known for taking on high-profile cases and winning. Together, they filed a lawsuit against the HOA on behalf of Ethan and several other affected residents. The legal complaint accused the organization of violating federal laws designed to protect people with disabilities, including the Fair Housing Act. It demanded not only financial compensation but also systemic changes to prevent future discrimination. As the lawsuit made headlines, public outrage continued to grow. Protesters gathered outside the HOA's offices, holding signs that read, "Accessibility is not optional," and "Shame on you, HOA." Social media campaigns amplified the message, with hashtags like #BreakTheGate and #HOABuse trending for days. Even politicians weighed in, calling for investigations into the HOA's practices. For the first time, the board members realized they were fighting a battle they couldn't win. Internally, cracks began to form within the HOA leadership. Some members tried to distance themselves from the controversy, claiming they'd opposed the decision to lock Ethan in but were outvoted. Others resigned outright, unwilling to face the mounting pressure. But the HOA president, a stubborn man named Richard Caldwell, refused to back down. He insisted that the organization had done nothing wrong and accused Claire of using her fame to bully them. Richard's defiance came to a head during a heated live interview on Claire's show. Sitting across from her in the studio, he looked visibly uncomfortable under the bright lights and piercing gaze of the camera. Claire greeted him with icy politeness, allowing him to explain his side before dismantling it piece by piece. "We have rules for a reason," Richard began, shifting in his seat. Our community thrives because we maintain standards. Allowing exceptions would set a dangerous precedent. Claire leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but firm. So you're saying that maintaining your standards is more important than ensuring someone like my brother can leave his own home? Richard hesitated, clearly unprepared for her directness. It's not about Ethan specifically, he stammered. It's about fairness to all homeowners. Fairness. Claire raised an eyebrow, letting the word hang in the air. Tell me, Mr. Caldwell, how is it fair to deny someone access to their driveway because a ramp doesn't match your idea of beauty? How is it fair to fine a disabled veteran for parking his van too far from the curb when it's the only way he can get out safely? Do you honestly believe these policies are reasonable, or are they just convenient excuses to avoid accommodating people with disabilities? The audience erupted in applause as Richard struggled to respond. His face turned red, and sweat beaded on his forehead. We follow the law," he muttered weakly. Claire wasn't finished. "Actually, you don't. Your actions violate multiple federal laws, and now you're facing a lawsuit that proves it. So tell me, Mr. Caldwell, why should anyone trust you to lead an organization responsible for protecting its residents?" By the end of the interview, Richard looked defeated. Viewers flooded social media with comments praising Claire's poise and condemning the hero's behavior. The segment became one of the most watched moments in the show's history, further eroding the HOA's credibility. Behind the scenes, the lawsuit progressed steadily. Lawyers uncovered damning evidence of discriminatory practices dating back years. Internal emails revealed discussions where board members mocked disabled residents, referring to their requests as nuisances. These revelations only deepened the public's disdain for the HOA. For Ethan, the fight was exhausting but empowering. Knowing that thousands of strangers supported him gave him strength. Claire, meanwhile, felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about justice for her brother. It was about sending a clear message. No one, regardless of their position or power, was above accountability. The HOA had picked the wrong family to mess with, and soon they'd learn exactly what that meant. Months passed, and the legal battle against the HOA reached its climax. The courtroom was packed with reporters, community members, and advocates for disability rights, all eager to witness the outcome of a case that had captured national attention. Claire sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly together as she listened intently to every word exchanged between the lawyers and the judge. Ethan, seated beside her in his wheelchair, exuded quiet confidence despite the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about their family anymore. It was about setting a precedent for fairness and inclusion. The judge's ruling came down decisively in favor of Ethan and the other plaintiffs. In a scathing verdict, he condemned the HOA's actions as discriminatory, heartless, and unlawful. No organization has the authority to prioritize aesthetics over human dignity, the judge declared, his voice firm. He ordered the HOA to remove the locked gate immediately, compensate affected families for emotional distress and financial burdens, and implement mandatory training on disability rights for all board members. Furthermore, the HOA would be placed under state supervision to ensure compliance moving forward. As the gavel struck, cheers erupted from the gallery. Claire hugged Ethan tightly, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in months, they could finally breathe easy. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them, eager for comments. Claire stepped up to the microphone, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Today's victory isn't just ours. It belongs to everyone who has ever been told they don't belong because of who they are or what they need," she said. "This proves that when we stand together, we can create real change." Ethan spoke next, his words carrying a quiet strength. "I never wanted to be at the center of something like this," he admitted. "But if sharing my story helps others feel less alone, then it was worth it. To anyone out there facing similar challenges, keep fighting. You deserve to live with dignity and respect." Back in their neighborhood, the HOA scrambled to comply with the court's orders. The locked gate was removed within days, replaced by a wide accessible pathway that met federal guidelines. Notices were sent to all residents reminding them of their rights under disability laws. Board members resigned one by one, unable to withstand the public scrutiny. Richard Caldwell, the former president, disappeared from view entirely, reportedly retreating from public life altogether. For Ethan, life began to feel normal again, or as close to normal as possible after such an ordeal. Neighbors who had once avoided him now greeted him warmly, some even apologizing for not speaking out sooner. A few even volunteered to help make his home even more accessible, installing additional features that went above and beyond what the law required. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to Ethan. Claire, meanwhile, found herself inspired in ways she hadn't expected. The outpouring of support from viewers reinforced her belief in the power of storytelling to drive change. She decided to launch a new series on her show called *Voices Unheard*, dedicated to shining a light on everyday people battling injustice. The first episode, Ethan's story, told in full, from the accident that changed his life to the triumph in the courtroom. As the segment aired, thousands of messages poured in from viewers thanking Claire and Ethan for their courage. Many shared their own struggles with discrimination, finding solace in knowing they weren't alone. One viewer wrote, "Your fight gave me hope. Thank you for reminding us that kindness and justice still matter." In the final scene of the episode, Claire stood alongside Ethan on his newly accessible porch, the sunset casting a golden glow over the neighborhood. They smiled at each other, two siblings who had faced adversity head-on and emerged stronger than ever. Behind them, kids played on the sidewalk, laughter filling the air, a reminder that communities could be places of unity, not division. Though the journey had been long and difficult, Claire and Ethan knew they had made a difference, not just for themselves, but for countless others. And as they watched the horizon together, they felt hopeful for the future. After all, sometimes the hardest battles lead to the brightest victories. The victory against the HOA marked a turning point not just for Claire and Ethan, but for the entire community and beyond. What started as a personal fight became a movement that resonated with people across the country. For Ethan, life slowly returned to a sense of normalcy, though he carried himself differently now. The experience had transformed him from someone who simply endured his circumstances into an advocate determined to make life better for others like him. Inspired by the overwhelming response to their story, Ethan began speaking publicly about disability rights. He attended conferences, joined panels, and worked closely with lawmakers to strengthen protections for vulnerable communities. His message was simple yet powerful. Accessibility isn't a privilege, it's a right. Audiences listened intently, moved by his courage and authenticity. Neighbors who once ignored him now approached him with admiration, offering support in ways both big and small. Some even volunteered to help maintain his property or run errands when needed. It was a stark contrast to the isolation he felt before, and it reminded him how much collective action could change lives. Claire, too, found new purpose in her career. Her show's *Voices Unheard* series quickly gained traction, becoming one of its most popular segments. Each episode highlighted stories of ordinary people fighting extraordinary battles. Single mothers battling unfair evictions, veterans denied health care benefits, elderly citizens struggling to keep their homes amid rising taxes. Through these narratives, Claire gave voice to those often overlooked by society. Viewers tuned in weekly, inspired by the resilience of the human spirit and motivated to take action in their own communities. Ethan made a guest appearance on one of the episodes, sharing his journey in detail. As he spoke about the locked gate, the court case, and the outpouring of support from strangers, his words struck a chord with viewers. Messages poured in afterward, thanking him for his honesty and vulnerability. Many expressed how his story encouraged them to stand up for themselves or reach out to someone facing similar challenges. One viewer wrote, "You showed me that no matter how hard things get, there's always hope if you refuse to give up." The siblings also noticed subtle changes in their neighborhood. The HOA, under state supervision, adopted more inclusive policies, ensuring accessibility modifications were approved without unnecessary hurdles. Other residents with disabilities reported feeling less intimidated to request accommodations. Even longtime skeptics admitted that the changes improved the community overall, not just for disabled individuals, but for everyone. Claire and Ethan continued to work together, using their platform to push for broader systemic reforms. They partnered with advocacy groups to lobby for stronger enforcement of disability rights laws at the federal level. Their efforts caught the attention of national leaders, sparking conversations about how local organizations like HOAs could better serve diverse populations. Slowly but surely, they began seeing tangible results: revised regulations, increased awareness, and greater accountability. On weekends, Claire would visit Ethan, and they'd spend hours sitting on his porch, watching the world go by. The once contentious neighborhood now felt warmer, more welcoming. Kids played freely, neighbors chatted over fences, and Ethan greeted passersby with a wave and a smile. Life wasn't perfect. There were still challenges, but it was infinitely better than it had been before. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Claire turned to Ethan with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" she asked. Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. "Every day," he replied. "We didn't just win a lawsuit. We proved that standing up for what's right can change everything. And that's something I'll carry with me forever." Claire smiled, resting her hand on his shoulder. Together, they had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious, not just for themselves, but for countless others who deserved dignity and respect. As the sky darkened and stars began to twinkle above, they sat in comfortable silence, grateful for the bond they shared and the impact they'd made. It was a reminder that even in the face of adversity, unity, determination, and love could light the way forward.